To constantly feel like you have to be threatened by it and to be tormented by it, to be re-traumatized over and over and over again, is not adaptive. In my head. Hey everyone, if you're new here, I'm Ryan Liberty. I do videos on mental health Monday through Friday, so if you want to keep your mental health in good shape, then subscribe. Tonight we're going to talk about hypervigilance and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So why do we become hypervigilant after PTSD? What does it look like? What can we do about it? We're going to discuss all of that tonight. So I myself am somebody who's had PTSD, and hypervigilance has been a big part of my life, and I understand it pretty well. And what hypervigilance is, I'll do a quick recap here. It's scanning your environment for threats and looking for things that are going to harm you. So usually we see this kind of like visually, like you're looking around trying to see like what's going on, is something going to hurt me? But you're also feeling like with your body, if something brushes against you, you might feel sensitive to that. You're smelling, you're listening, and sounds grab your attention, and you're just basically on alert that something could harm you. And this makes sense after experiencing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because you've been threatened, your life was threatened, and so this is your body's adaptive way of trying to protect you. It remembers that your life was threatened, and it's looking now for things that could potentially also threaten your life. So something that I've experienced myself is with PTSD, we have traumatic memories, and we have flashbacks, or sometimes we have emotional flashbacks. And a flashback doesn't mean that you have to experience it like you're standing in the same memory of the trauma that happened to you. An emotional flashback could just mean that you have these feelings that arise inside of you, these body sensations, these emotions that are related to what happened, and they were triggered by something in your environment. So a quick little example here, maybe there was this particular song playing when your trauma happened, and you're just driving down the road, and all of a sudden this song comes on, and you may not even be aware of it, because you may not be aware that that song was playing when you had this traumatic event happen to you, but because that song came on, your body switches on, and basically your nervous system goes off, your amygdala gets a little crazy. It's kind of like the alarm bell in your nervous system, and it says, something's gonna happen, we need to prepare ourselves, and it gets you ready for fight or flight or freeze. And so the song comes on the radio, your amygdala turns on, and you're like, holy crap, what's going on? Why am I in a heightened state right now? Why am I anxious? And so you're looking around to see what's wrong, what's going to harm me, what's going to hurt me, and you're feeling it, and you're looking, and you're listening, and you're smelling, and you're using your five senses to an extent where they normally wouldn't be used. Hypervigilance is over focusing on your senses and over being in touch with the environment and trying to see what's threatening, because healthy people don't walk around feeling like everything is threatening them. They don't look around as they go about their day thinking that things are going to harm them. They're alert, but they're not alert all the time. So this is what happens, and the hypervigilance gets activated, and it's just the normal. This PTSD is pretty normal, actually. It's our body trying to protect us from something that we remember tried to harm us and trying to kill us. However, hypervigilance becomes a problem, and PTSD itself is a problem, and let's talk about that. Now, if you need to understand what hypervigilance is a little bit better, or if you need to understand post-traumatic stress disorder especially a little bit better, I have a whole series on post-traumatic stress disorder. I have videos on hypervigilance. I have an example of hypervigilance. I'm going to put the links up here in the little card that pops up. You don't have to watch it right away. Those links stay at the end of the video, so if you want to just hit the little eye bubble thing that comes up at the end of the video, you can do that. I don't know if you knew that, so I just wanted to put that out there for the people who come to this channel. So hypervigilance and PTSD, why does it become a problem? Well, post-traumatic stress disorder is a problem because the thing that threatened you is no longer around, and to constantly feel like you have to be threatened by it and to be tormented by it, to be re-traumatized over and over and over again, is not adaptive. The adaptiveness of your brain to protect you from things has long passed. The experience is past, you're not being harmed anymore, and your brain doesn't need to be so ready to fight or flight against something that's not even happening. So that's where post-traumatic stress disorder comes in. You're overreacting to stimulus that wouldn't threaten other people. Now, when it comes to hypervigilance, that's also maladaptive after a traumatic event because you don't need to feel threatened all the time. Generally, unless you're in an active war zone and you're not somebody who's used to being in that war zone, you could be adapted to a war zone also, something else to point out. But if you are living somewhere that's safe, right now I'm in a place where generally I can expect to be safe. I don't have to expect that something's going to happen to me. So I don't need to be hypervigilant. So if I am experiencing hypervigilance in this situation, then I know that something's not quite right. And what happens is when you're hypervigilant, you often have an exaggerated startle response, which is something that happens with anxiety, and it's something that happens with post-traumatic stress disorder. And an exaggerated startle response means that you're jumpy, basically. When something does stimulate you, when something arouses you, when something pokes at you, let's say, then you jump, or you get your arousal level jumps too high, and you become oversensitive to everything around you. And so that's not adaptive, because when you're oversensitive to things, you're not thinking straight, you're reacting to things instead of being proactive. This is something that I've noticed in myself, and I've noticed in other people who've been through things like childhood abuse or spousal abuse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or siblings, or parents, or whoever. When you've gone through emotional abuse, physical abuse, you sometimes become hypervigilant and you experience trauma symptoms or post-traumatic stress disorder, and you become hypervigilant. For me, I noticed how people's footsteps land in a room, because that gives me information on whether they're approaching me with anger or they're approaching me softly. And for people who haven't been through abuse, they may not even notice that kind of a thing, but I do, because I'm generally more hypervigilant in my day-to-day, which is adaptive, but it's also not adaptive if it's taking over my day and interfering with my functioning. But what I've noticed with people who've been through abuse is that they're very hypervigilant to interpersonal situations and how people talk to them, and they're also very hypervigilant to their own feelings. And so if they have a feeling of anger or they have a feeling of fear, it gets magnified very quickly, and that's where the post-traumatic stress disorder comes in, because the trauma is setting off the amygdala. The emotion gets amplified, the amygdala turns on, and then your executive functioning goes off, and you can't think straight, and now you're just reacting to the world. So this is how hypervigilance interferes with our life, and it's not a diagnosis in itself, but you see it in anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So obviously, depending on if there's an underlying disorder that's going on here, you're going to have to treat it depending on the disorder that you're experiencing, but there are things that we can just generally do to minimize hypervigilance. Let's talk about those. So what can we do about hypervigilance? Well, for one thing, we can notice when it's happening. We need to be aware of our body and aware of our thoughts and our mental state, and aware, am I scanning my environment for threats? Do I feel anxious? Am I thinking is that person going to hurt me? Is this dangerous? Am I in it? What kind of thoughts are running through your head? If they're thoughts about danger, if they're maybe even thoughts about hating other people or hating yourself, it could be that you're hypervigilant to your environment and you're trying to protect yourself. So just be aware of your thoughts, be aware of how you're feeling, and if there's anxiety going on, you may feel like your heart starts beating a little faster, you may feel your muscles tense up, you may start to get hot or something. Everyone experiences it a little bit differently, but if you just get in touch with that and start to notice your arousal level throughout the day, you may start to notice that hypervigilance is going on. Now, if you find that hypervigilance is going on and you're not in a full-on panic attack freaking out, then you can start to pay attention to your breath and slow down your breathing, work to calm yourself down, tell yourself positive thoughts, tell yourself you're safe. Look for evidence that you're safe instead of looking for evidence that you're threatened. Find people that make you feel safe and get in contact with them and ask them to help you soothe yourself. If this is an area that you have particular trouble with, of course, seeing a therapist is always recommended. I also have some worksheets on stress regulation that may be of some help to you over on my Patreon page. They are free, so go ahead and check those out if you're interested. If you are somebody who's been through hypervigilance, we would love to hear from you, our community here. Let us know your story and what has helped you to stop being so hypervigilant, or maybe just share what it feels like so people don't feel alone down below in the comments. And if you're new here, again, I'll remind you, I do mental health videos Monday through Friday. If you're into mental health, if you want to improve your own mental health, there is something for you on this channel. I've got over 225 videos, I believe, at this point, and I'm just going and going and going. So we will produce more, and you will have something here for you if you don't see it right away. Thank you as always for being here with me, and I'll see you next time, everyone.